Picture this. It's the early 1800s in rural England. Dawn's mist drifts through a crowded marketplace. Vendors shout over the bray of livestock. But today, the main spectacle isn't a horse or a sheep, it's a woman. She stands at the edge of the stalls, her wrist tied by a ribbon to a wooden block. Her husband raises a stick and calls aloud, "Wife for sale." A tidy housekeeper, stays sober, good with children. Men watch, amused. Bids begin. A shilling, a pint of ale. Husband barks, going, final offer. A shilling. The hammer falls. She's sold. No divorce, no court, no rights, only a marketplace transaction. And the law? It looked the other way. This was Victorian England's hidden escape clause, selling wives instead of divorcing them. It was silent, public, cruel, and shockingly common. This is the tragic story of marriage and market. To understand why Victorian men sold their wives, you must first understand the nature of marriage in 19th century England. Marriage was not a union of equals, it was a legal and economic contract. When a woman married, she became a feme covert, meaning her legal identity was covered by her husband's. She lost ownership of her own body, property, earnings, and legal standing. Children too belonged to the father. Under coverture law, a married woman could not open a bank account, sign a contract, or pursue a separate existence. She existed only as part of her husband's estate. Divorce, when possible at all, was scandalous and prohibitively expensive. Until 1857, it required a private act of parliament, costing hundreds or even thousands of pounds, money only the aristocracy could muster. Divorce also carried enormous social stigma. A woman accused of adultery lost custody of her children and was shamed. A man could divorce more easily, especially if he could prove his wife's infidelity, but it remained a costly and humiliating process. So, for ordinary working-class couples, there was no viable path to uncoupling within the legal system. Enter the informal remedy, wife selling. While never legal, it was socially tolerated. Courts rarely intervened. Newspapers often treated the sales with farce. In rural fairs and livestock markets across England, men tied their wives with rope, ribbon, even halter straps, led them into the ring, and auctioned them off like cattle. Sometimes wives agreed to be sold, viewing it as a painful but open escape. Often, the man facing burden of marriage debt, domestic abuse, or personal failure sought to discard the wife. The purchaser, a neighbor, a suitor, or even a stranger willing to pay shillings or pints of beer. The crowd watched, bet, laughed. A brass band might play. Local officials turned blind eyes. In Timmins district in the 1830s, local pamphlets recorded multiple sales. A man auctioned his wife for 12 pence plus a quart of ale. Another sold his wife with a piglet for 18 pence. In June 1837, a woman was sold for 3 shillings, her husband crying, "I can't keep her no more." Though often described as local color, the practice endured for centuries, from Tudor times into the Victorian era, because it met a need. It allowed dissolution without divorce. It let men avoid caring for their spouse. For wives, although humiliating, it sometimes offered freedom from abuse. And for neighbors, the sales reinforced patriarchal order while entertaining the masses. But at what cost? The public spectacle stripped women of their agency and dignity. The purchaser became the new master, legally and socially. The original husband escaped legal responsibility. Communities watched. Women vanished. Children were sold or left behind. Entire lives were uprooted. And the law remained silent. This was Victorian society's hypocrisy, public moralizing about sanctity of marriage, while private toleration of its breakdown by spectacle. The same society that idolized the submissive angel in the house also laughed at her sale. And while divorce reforms gradually took root mid-century, the underground market continued, fueled by class inequality, legal loopholes, and cultural denial. And so the thread of wife selling began in humble fairs, but it would unravel in tragic personal stories. That brings us to the next section: the women who endured this humiliation and survival for freedom. In 1815, In a Lewis livestock market, Susan Sargent stood trembling. She was tightly tied to a wooden post with a ribbon, her husband at her side. He gripped a stick, cleared his throat, and announced, "Fine wife. Keeps house, cooks, minds well. Only 23. Bids passed. A man from a nearby village offered a shilling and a pot of ale. Going once, twice, the hammer dropped. Susan's husband nodded. She walked away with the buyer, not a legal document, but accepted nonetheless. To her, the sale meant escape. Her marriage was violent, loveless, and hopeless. Her buyer was someone she'd courted, her life, her choice, forced into public shame to reclaim private agency. Contrast that with Mary Chapman's fate in 1832. In Hales Owen, she was led by her husband to a market ring, tied with rope. He had grown tired of her refusals to bear more children. She was sold to a stranger for 14 pence. The buyer bundled her into a cart and transported her miles away. She was never seen again. Rumors of abuse, exploitation, and destitution circulated, but no follow-up. To the world, she was gone. To her community, a spectacle was concluded, mercy not extended. A harsher case emerges in Sheffield in 1796. A man sold his wife and 2 young children for 5 shillings. The buyer quickly abandoned them. The children were taken by parish authorities. The wife disappeared into poverty, dependent on scant charity and forced labor. Neither mother nor children had legal recourse. Sale severed ties but offered no support. Official records list her as single woman with no support, as she aged into obscurity. These stories illustrate variety, some consensual, some coercive, some fatal. But all share one thread: wives, with or without consent, were treated like trade goods. Consent itself was shadowed by power disparities. Even willing sales happened under conditions of extreme duress: poverty, threat, abuse, or isolation. Newspapers chronicled these events with sensationalism. Sales were listed alongside livestock tallies. A reporter might quip about a wife stout of build, fair of skin, sharp of tongue, sold for 12 pence. The humor in print belied the suffering behind the rope. There were children sold too, or abandoned later. No laws recognized their best interests. Legal responsibility vanished with the sale, and recovering families from breakup was virtually impossible, without records, support, or recognition. In one case, Elizabeth Lane in 1823 agreed to a wife sale with her husband's approval after years of domestic violence. She was sold to a former suitor in exchange for a fresh start. She later remarried legally when reforms passed, but her children, born without legal recognition, faced unclear inheritance and social stigma. Elizabeth's story shows that even better outcomes offered lingering scars. However, the public context shaped perceptions. Wife selling was often recorded as lower-class mischief, but rarely condemned. Authorities hesitated. Was the sale prostitution? Adultery? A public nuisance? Courts declined. Police rarely intervened. Society looked away because, in a perverse way, it preserved patriarchal norms. A man selling his wife publicly reaffirmed his dominance. Communities gossiped, but rarely empathized. As divorce became possible after the Matrimonial Causes Act 1857, legal separation started to replace wife selling. Yet the practice persisted into the 1860s, especially in rural, working-class areas where divorce remained financially impossible or morally shameful. And what about the women? Many vanished. Others lived precariously. Some escaped into new lives. Some were forced into prostitution, beggary, or indentured labor. Children lost mothers or fathers or both. Families splintered. And collectively, these women were erased. Remembering Susan, Mary, Elizabeth, and countless others is essential. Their lives reveal how human dignity can be traded away when legal systems and cultural norms fail. Their stories, hidden, scattered, erased, reveal the grotesque underside of Victorian morality. Marketplace freedom was hollow freedom. Public spectacle was private tragedy. By the late 19th century, England began changing laws and attitudes. The 1857 Matrimonial Causes Act created civil courts for divorce, making formal separation more attainable, at least for those with means. The Married Women's Property Acts of 1882 and 1893 granted women limited legal control over property and earnings. These reforms gradually chipped away at feudal marriage power structures. But change was uneven and delayed. Despite legal progress, wife-selling persisted quietly. Communities tolerated it until the 1860s or 70s. Why? Because stopping it meant addressing deeper hypocrisies. Feminine obedience, patriarchal property, and dual standards thrived on maintaining wife-selling as folklore, but ignoring its roots in legal inequality and class oppression. In literature and popular culture, wife-selling became metaphorical. Thomas Hardy's The Mayor of Casterbridge, 1886, begins with Michael Henchard auctioning his wife and child at a fair, sold for a shilling. Hardy's depiction is emotional and tragic, an indictment. But period readers saw it as an eccentric anomaly, not widespread reality. Historians now recognize many real-life tales echoed in that narrative. Later historians, mid-20th century onward, began uncovering archives, court reports, local papers, parish records. They estimate hundreds of documented cases, yet believe thousands went unrecorded. Wife-selling wasn't law, but it worked as custom. Communities implicitly recognized the new marriage. Courts tacitly allowed it. The law turned blind eye, until the practice faded by default rather than reform. The legacy is still with us. Marriage below legal recognition continues in some cultures. Gendered power imbalances persist. Economic vulnerability still traps many women in abusive unions because formal separation is unaffordable or stigmatized. The specter of wife-selling shapes how we think about consent, coercion, and male privilege. When legal systems deny exit, people find other ways, sometimes contradictory, sometimes cruel. Freedom bought at the cost of dignity isn't freedom. Marketplace justice is still injustice. But history also offers hope. The public tolerance of wife-selling ended because legal reforms gradually shifted power. Marriage ceased to be purely a man's property contract. Women gained rights. Divorce became possible. While imperfect, these changes paved the path toward agency. There's a lesson. Unjust customs endure until formal structures, law, policy, culture, push back. Silence isn't approval. Forgetting isn't absolution. And stories of suffering, no matter how painful, need remembering. Today, when we treat a woman's body, labor, or contract as secondary, we echo those Victorian markets. Selling wives reminds us that when law denies humanity, market logic steps in and often crushes it. So what can we do? We can listen. We can speak. We can demand dignity. We can support legal reforms, domestic violence protections, property rights, economic security. We can reclaim the names of those lost wives. Not as curiosities, but as humans. Let us remember Susan, Mary, Elizabeth, not as caricatures, not as sensational tales, but as women who made impossible choices in a world that refused them. Their stories are stitches in the tapestry of history, painful reminders that we must guard equality, that we must challenge normal when it hides injustice. If this exploration of hidden history resonated with you, please hit the like button and subscribe for more stories that uncover the uncomfortable truths of our past. Comment below, have you ever come across legends or local tales of wife-selling or similar practices in your country's history? Let's share and listen. Together, we can honor those forgotten lives. Thank you for staying with me. Let's remember. Let's learn. Let's keep the conversation going.